Okay, I believe we are live. Welcome back to the channel. This one is, I don't do live streams all that often, but I thought, being my birthday tomorrow, get a video out. Let's do it. So, yeah, normally I do this as separate videos, but I thought I'd get it all done as one little video. I'm going to be speaking about NRL 2022 season reviews, and a lot of people will get these out nice and early, obviously, because we want to all put out our World Cup content, which I'll be looking at putting out some Rugby League World Cup content in the coming days, that's for sure. Let's have a look at the chat. We got Aiden saying hi. Good day, Aiden. So, look, let's get straight into it. We're going to be speaking about all 16 as pictured NRL teams. There's a bit of a background there, a few issues with the green screen effects. But, yeah, all teams from 16th through to 1st probably go for about half an hour to 40 minutes. So, kick back with your drink. For me tonight, I don't know if you can see it. There you go. It is Mountain Dew as my choice of drink as we go through the 2022 teams. Basically, their best win, worst loss. Did they exceed or below expectation? I will do a separate video where I will be reacting to my ladder predictor at the start of the year compared to what actually happened. But for now, let's get straight into it. NRL 2022 season reviews. Good day, TJ Sports, and good day to William Pearson. All right, we'll try and keep an eye on the chat there, but let's get into the first team, which is 16th position, and it is the West Tigers. Now, I believe I predicted the West Tigers to finish 16th last year, so I didn't want to be too harsh on them. I did think I had them in 15th. I said they won't get much better. Jackson Hastings obviously went to the Tigers this year, and he had a really good season with the Tigers. He started off in that number 7, or in the halves, in the number 7 jersey, but he transitioned himself into a few games at lock before he got injured and eventually ended up out for the season. Early on, they lost Adam Dewey as well. They picked up their first win, which is probably their best win as well, against the Parramatta Eels, 21 points to 20 at CommBank. Everyone remembers that game. It was one of the games of the year. They were at huge odds, about $10 odds for them as well. And then you had Brent Naden come across to the Tigers as well later in the season. For the Tigers, a lot of people had them wooden spoon. I had them bottom 4. It's kind of expected. A lot of issues. I thought Farmua Brown was probably one of their best players for the season overall. He's scoring a lot of tries, playing and finding his position in dummy half. Much better option, in my opinion, than Jacob Little. I think Farmua Brown going forward is that good kind of option. Kelma Talangi had some nice carries, I believe. He's now off to the Manly Seagulls as well, as we have Levi in the chat saying hi. But yeah, for me, the West Tigers, I think their best win was against the Eels. You could argue that their best win was against the Brisbane Broncos. I can't believe I tipped them to win that game, but something just about the Tigers at Suncorp. They play all right there, and I remembered that, so I went with them there. But they obviously finished with the wooden spoon. Obviously, their worst loss, probably the last one of the season, against the Canberra Raiders to be down 42-0 at halftime and going to lose the match 54 points to 10, I believe it was a very embarrassing result for the West Tigers. And look, I think in round 1, they had a nice performance against the Storm. They showed signs that they could compete overall this year, but there just wasn't anything from the West Tigers this year. And if I had to grade their season, I think I would give them a 2.5 out of 10. Let's move into the New Zealand Warriors. We'll check back with the chat here. Levi has commented a second time, so we'll leave that one. The New Zealand Warriors, obviously an interesting one. They returned home back to New Zealand after being at the Central Coast and then being at Redcliffe. So it was great to see Warriors home game. One of the moments of the year, in my opinion, when they played the Tigers, not the game itself, just for them being at home. They lost it in the most Warriors way against the Titans. There you go. The Titans over there and the Warriors there. There you go. But yeah, the Warriors for mine, very disappointing. I had the Warriors around 9th position. They have some really nice buys going into next year. I think they're going a little bit under the radar. I don't know if they'll be top 8, but I think they can potentially avoid that bottom 3 spot. We will wait and see what I think of them when I actually see those teams on paper. But as we have some more people in the chat, oh no, there's a spammer. We'll ignore that. But as for the Warriors, look, I think Reece Walsh had a bit of second-year syndrome, had a few good moments for the most part. He's obviously now returning to the Brisbane Broncos, but I don't know, man. If I know a lot of people had them lower. Maybe if I had them lower, I would have said it's expected. But I think with some of the signings they've had over the last couple of years, that this is a side that could have done a lot better. Obviously, their loss against the Melbourne Storm, 70 points to 10 on Anzac Day, probably their worst loss of the season, and their best win, probably the upset against the Canberra Raiders. They won that game 21 points to 20 in Golden Point. They also beat the Broncos earlier in the season, who obviously for the most part had a fantastic season, the Brisbane Broncos. But for me, Warriors season, I would probably, just because of the expectation factor, I would probably give them they had some all right moments, didn't they? They had some all right moments, but for the most part, they weren't great. I'm going to give them a 3.5 out of 10 for the New Zealand Warriors. And I thought Josh Curran, who was great last year, had a really nice season once again, but I believe he's been stood down. I could be wrong. All right, next up, we're talking about the Newcastle Knights. Newcastle Knights, for mine, very disappointing season. Just where I expected them to be. I remember putting them about 13th, 14th, so I guess I should say perfect. But the Newcastle Knights, they're a team that normally play their best footy at home. You don't want to go to Newcastle, but they were appalling this season. They managed to just pick up a few wins at home. Very poor home record. I think it was last year when they beat Manly in an upset. I don't even think it was this year. I'm going to have a look at their games. I didn't watch too many. I went to that Tigers win where they beat the Tigers in round 2. But yeah, Newcastle, they had probably their best win of the season in round 1 against the Roosters, 20-6. We just didn't know what to expect. They played an understrength Penrith side. They went down 38-20, so scoring plenty of points over there. At Bathurst, they had 2 weeks in a row where they scored 2 points against the Eels and the Storm. Both of those games were at home, so really embarrassing results there for the Newcastle Knights. Thumped by the Panthers, a close game, a loss, a shitty loss. They shouldn't have lost that game. They blew that game for themselves against the Raiders in round 15. So look, yeah, I think probably either that Titans game where they went 38-12, they finally let themselves click, and Edric Lee had a blinder, and everyone was watching either that game or Stranger Things at the time. So I was watching Stranger Things, but Edric Lee, I believe he scored four or five. I think it was 5 tries in that match. So Edric Lee had a nice little season for the Knights, but just because of their home record, and look, on paper, they're not the best squad, but they've still got some players who have had roles in Origin, whether it be previously or before. You expect a lot more from this side. So I'm going to go with, once again, a 3.5 out of 10 for the Newcastle Knights. They weren't great at all in 2022. Next up, we move into a team that looked like they were a certainty for the Wooden Spoon early on, but in 13th, it is the Gold Coast Titans. Now, I mentioned in round 1 that I thought there was more for the Titans to look forward to than the Eels after seeing that close robbery in a lot of people's minds, and I think they have the right to argue that. But then the Titans responded with a win over the Warriors, 20 points to 18 at home. They then were flogging the Raiders, and then the Raiders came back to beat them in a game, 24 points to 22. They won a game against the Tigers where the Tigers lost it in the most Tigers way possible. And they stuck in there. Besides the game against the Titans where they got, the Cowboys where they got blown out of the water, they lost by 8 to Manly, lost by 6 to Parramatta, lost by 14 to Penrith, but they kept them scoreless in the first half, I think it was. And then going into the second half, the first try wasn't scored until the 43rd minute. So I thought that was a pretty good sign for the Titans. And then the Titans, they picked up a couple wins. They were beating the Broncos convincingly at halftime. The Broncos ended up winning 35 points to 24. So really embarrassing result, especially against your rivals when you're leading 24 points to 4 in that game. Titans fans will have PTSD about that one. Then they had a close encounter with the Sharks where they lost that game 18 points to 10. Close game against the Broncos, lost that one 16 points to 12. And then the Storm beat them 32 to 14. Then their best win of the season, the Titans 44, Manly Seagulls 24. Manly were favourites going into that game. They were losing a few games. The Titans had it at halftime. They were leading 20 points to 12. Tanner Boyd kicked 7 from 7 and 7 tries were scored at Seabus Super Stadium that game. But as for their worst loss of the season, I would probably have to go with the loss to the Raiders. They had that game on a stick against Canberra at GIO. They were leading 22 points to 4. I think you could argue the same against their rivals in the Broncos, especially the fact that a field goal was kicked against them. But for me, the Titans, I didn't expect them to make the 8. I expect them around 10th, 11th. And for me, I think I'm going to give the Titans a 4. I don't think the Titans were that bad compared to those other bottom 3 sides. Still a lot of improvement for the club, but I think I'm going to go with a 4 for the Gold Coast Titans there. Now we move into 12th position. A few people had this team in the 8. I had them around, I think, again, 10th or 11th. I might have had them. Maybe I had the Titans lower. I could have. I'll have to check. But the Bulldogs, they had a few interesting games this season. They picked up a few W's, more than they've picked up in recent seasons. Obviously, they've avoided the bottom 4 this year, and that's something they haven't done for the last few years. The Canterbury Bankstown Bulldogs, they welcomed a few new signings in Josh Addo-Carr. Early on, they welcomed Matt Duffy, who's now over at the Super League. They welcomed Matt Burton. That Burton and Addo-Carr combination working nicely. Paul Vaughan had a few good games. The game against the Rabbitohs, I remember. He really did stand out in that game. The Bulldogs, they beat the Cowboys in round 1, 6 points to 4. We didn't know what to expect from either team there. They were kept to nil by the Melbourne Storm at Amy Park, 44 points to 0. I think they had a great win against the Roosters, a grindy win, 16 points to 12. They were leading 10 points to 4 at halftime. The Roosters came back in it towards the end, but in the end, the Bulldogs' defense withheld them out. So I think that was one of their best victories for the most part for the year. They had this game against the Tigers where they started to really come back and they tied it up 18-all. But then they lost the game 36 to 22. So that was a really disappointing one for the Bulldogs fans against the Tigers there in round 11. Great crowd at Belmore. Great win against Parramatta, 34 points to 4. Addo-Carr scoring tries for fun. There's a few highs for the Bulldogs. They also led the North Queensland Cowboys. It was 10-all at halftime, but they scored in the first minute, then in the 18th. But in the end, the Cowboys got home 28 points to 14. So they need to work on those games next year if they are to be a competitive side. And they finished off the season with a victory against Manly after being down 16-12 at halftime, winning the game 21 points to 20. So the Bulldogs, for mine, look, I think they're really, really improved. I think they've had some really good moments. I'm actually going to give them a 6. I know it's a bit high for this one, but I think the Bulldogs, with some of their signings and with some of the results early on, being what some people expected and not doing much, and then actually putting those results together and getting some good wins too against some decent quality sides like the Roosters and Parramatta. I think I'm going to give them a 6. I think a 6. I think a 6 is fair for the Canterbury Bulldogs. So yeah, I'm going to give them a 6. Next up, Manly Sea Eagles. Well, shit, hey. I had this team winning the premiership. Very stupid prediction. Everyone makes stupid predictions. Laugh all you want. I thought their defense was going to be solid. I thought Turbo was going to be fit, but he never is. He had that great season last year, but he just couldn't remain fit for the 2022 season. Manly, what can be said? Ethan Bullymore scored a great try in round 1. They look like they were going to be a competitive side. I'm getting up all their games now. Very disappointing to be where they were early on the ladder. They had a win against the Bulldogs. They had a win against the Raiders. They beat the Titans. They beat the Knights. Then they lost to the Sharks 34 to 22. Now, don't forget, they were down 32-0 in this game where Talakai just monstered them in that first half. Then they lost to the Rabbitohs At Central Coast Stadium, when they had a player sent off the field, I think it was Carl Lawton who was sent off from that game. They were kept to nil at Suncorp by the Broncos, 38 points to nil, even though the home side was the Sea Eagles in that game. Parramatta beat them 22-20 with a kick from the sideline from Mitchell Moses. Then they beat the Warriors, flogged the Tigers, should have beaten the Cowboys. They were leading the game 10-6, but then they came out firing. But the Cowboys towards the end scored 5 tries in 5 minutes to win the game, 28 points to 26. Probably one of their hardest losses to take. As good as the Cowboys side is, it was Origin period. They should have really gotten the points that night. Then they should have won. I tipped the Dragons in this game just because they have a great record against them. But the Dragons against Manly, the Dragons winning 20 points to 6. Then they had a competitive game against Parramatta where it was 14-all at halftime. Parramatta winning that game 36-20 at Brookvale. Again, like the Knights, not really winning at Brookvale. I'm just counting now. There was a couple, to be fair. 1, 2, 3. So they were better at home. 4, 5. 5 wins for the Manly Sea Eagles at home. So not a horrible compared to teams like the Tigers or teams like the Knights, but still not the best. Very disappointed in Manly's season. They still started strong, had a few good games. I'm going to give Manly a 4.5 purely because of their end to the season and not turning up for some games against some sides that they should have, in my opinion. Now we move into a little bit of a surprise packet. It is the St. George Illawarra Dragons who were fighting for a top 8 spot, believe it or not. The St. George Illawarra Dragons on the back of Ben Hunt having a phenomenal season, easily their player of the year without a doubt. If anyone disagrees, come at me. But for the Dragons this season, let's have a look at their wins and loss rate. They had a close loss against the Panthers. They lost that game 20 points to 16 against the Penrith Panthers. That game was at Cogra. They were flogged by Parramatta, almost put 50 on them, but they conceded 48 instead of 50 in that game. They beat the Knights 21 points to 16. Really weird scores when they play around Easter. It always happens. Really nice win for the Dragons. A deserved win on Anzac Day. Francis Molo scoring the first try. That one at huge odds as well. 14 points to 12 over the Roosters on Anzac Day. Scrappy game against the West Tigers. Then you've got a game against, after that, you've got the game against the Rabbitohs. The game against the Rabbitohs again, really nice win. Rabbitohs were hot and cold, but they were still favourites going into the game. They won that game by 20 points, the Dragons as well, so really nice game. And Cody Ramsey was doing a great job at fullback throughout the season. It was another game where he showed just how good. And Jack DeBellin for mine, really good season for the Dragons as well. So the Dragons for mine, they were a surprise packet. They beat the Canberra Raiders at Wollongong, but then the Raiders beat them at Canberra. They lost to the Roosters 54-26 after having a 14-12 lead at halftime at Central Coast Stadium. So a few games were blowouts. Not really any new players from memory as such, so you can't really judge it off new and old. Tarek Sims obviously was suspended and spent a bit of time on the sideline, and now Tarek Sims is off to Melbourne. The fact that they were fighting for the 8, I know a few people had them in the 8. I had them around that 13th, 11th, 13th, somewhere like there. So look, I think they've had a pretty good season for the most part, and I think like the Titans, I think I'm going to go with a 5. I'm going to go with a 5 here for the Dragons. I think they're halfway to good, halfway to not. Ben Hunt, you get a 10 out of 10 for this season, in my opinion. But for the Dragons themselves, I'm going to go with a 5 for the Dragons. Before we move in here, we've got some comments. True, and Para versus Dragons. Oh, boy. Not Newcastle. 9th. Brisbane Broncos. Well, the Brisbane Broncos had a phenomenal season. You cannot say that they did not. The Broncos were a team that a lot of people had outside the 8. I had them in the 8. I know a lot of people did have them in the 8 as well. But for the most part, people had this team outside the top 8. And they were a team to watch all year. They were a pretty good team to watch all year as well, in my opinion. They kick-started their season with an 11-4 victory over the Rabbitohs, where Adam Reynolds didn't play. Then beat the Bulldogs. They were flogged by the Cowboys, their rivals. So we obviously know that the Cowboys had a much better season overall than the Broncos. But we weren't getting a read on the season. But what we were getting a read on at that game was Jeremiah Nanai and just how freakish he was. Lost to the Roosters by 4 points in that game. Flogged the Bulldogs by 20. Flogged the Rabbitohs by 20. An upset victory against the Sharks, 16 points to 7. 38-0 against Manly. What a great victory for the home crowd, especially being Magic Round. And after last year's, I think it was 50-6 result. And then their comeback win against the Titans. So they were on a really nice stretch here. They scored 26 against the Cowboys, who had a pretty good defense in a lot of their games this season. They flogged Parramatta at CommBank Stadium. They were really hot and cold at this point. They then got flogged by the Tigers, flogged by the Roosters before they flogged the Knights. And then they were flogged by the Melbourne Storm, 60 points to 12. Parramatta put 50 on them. And they ended their season very poorly with a loss at Cogra, 22 points to 12 in a game that they were looking like they could go on to win. They had their opportunity, but in the end, the Dragons were just a little bit too good. So, look, they spent a lot of time inside the 8, exceeding people's expectations. I had the Broncos in 7th position. They were very close to making the top 8. They lost their couple games towards the end. But for mine, the Broncos, you look at this result, right? They had some big points scored against the Cowboys, may not have gotten the win. They beat Rabbitohs. They almost beat Roosters, but they beat Rabbitohs. They beat Cronulla. They beat Rabbitohs against, that's 3. They came back to beat the Titans. I probably won't count that one. They scored 20 against the Storm. You're going to take that as a great effort as well. They beat the Dragons earlier in the season, who were fighting for that top 8 spot, but they had a lot of players out in that game. Then they beat Parramatta. So look, I think out of those 5 there, I think you're going to have to plus 1. I think you're going to have to plus 1, and I'm going to give the Broncos a 6. I think the Broncos had a pretty good season for the most part. I'm going to give the Broncos, I think I'm going to give them 6.5. And I think they had a pretty good season, but I do think Payne Haas shouldn't have gotten Prop of the Year in the Dally M Awards. I think that was an absolute joke. As we jump into the comments, we've got a few here. We've got, we all love the Broncos. You all know it. Up the Roosters. Up the Chooks. Where do you think they'll be on the ladder next season? No, I won't be speaking about that. I will be doing this review continuously. Let's move into the next team. We have been going for 23 minutes and we get into 8th position. We are now into the top 8 where we start with the Canberra Raiders. Now, the Canberra Raiders, they were in the grand final back in 2019. They were a top 8 side in 2020, really dropping off in 2021. Back in the top 8 in 2022. Bit of a surprise packet for some for the year. They started off their season with a win against Cronulla. They have a great record against Cronulla, and a great record. Great win against the Titans in Canberra, 24 points to 22, where they just turned it around in the second half. Nothing was going their way, and then they pulled out a win. But then in round 6, they were up 12-0 and lost the game 18 points to 12 against the Cowboys. Like, what are you doing to lose a game like that? Flogged by Penrith, 36-6. They were on that 3-game losing streak before they did pull off a win against the Canterbury Bankstown Bulldogs. They flogged the Sharks. They're the Sharks, man. They are the Sharks' kryptonite. They flogged Rabbitohs. I tipped them in that game. I tipped them 13+, one of my upsets of the year earlier in the season. They hung in against the Eels in Canberra, who they've got a great record against, but couldn't get the job done. Parramatta winning 28 points to 20. Beat the Roosters 22-16. Close loss against the Broncos. Beat Newcastle off a Hudson Young chip and chase. So it was kind of a win-loss factor. But I think for me, their best win is at Amy Park. They have a great record there anyway, but 20 points to 16 in favour of Canberra, getting the win over the Melbourne Storm. Melbourne Storm had a funny old season, but the Raiders were huge odds going into this game. They were unexpected to win it. They were coming off a bye as well. So I guess that may have even helped them. But I think it was their best win of the season. As for their worst loss, it's tough to say, isn't it? You could say the 40-4 in the semi-final against Parramatta, but I think week one, they beat the Storm 28 points to 20. So you've got to give them some credit for that. I would say that the Raiders' worst loss of the season was probably that 36-6 over the Panthers. Look, their worst loss should be that Cowboys game. I'm going to say it, that Cowboys game. You were up 12-0 for God's sake. So, look, I think for that, I'm going to say that. I went to only one game in Canberra, which was their win against the Dragons. Scrappy game of footy. But yeah, that game against the Cowboys, that's your worst loss of the season, Raiders. Raiders made the 8. I didn't expect them to make the 8. I expected them bottom 3. So I'm going to give the Raiders a 6.5. I think they exceeded expectation. Still inconsistent. Can't put them in that 8, 9, 10 range, even though they did make the top 8. I'm going to give the Raiders a 6.5. All right, moving on. We have 7th position, a team that a lot of you follow. I know there's a huge fan base for this one, Random South Sky, and it's this man over here. Oh, over there. There he is, Cameron Murray. What a season from Cameron Murray. South Sydney Rabbitohs had a funny old season, didn't they? I think the Rabbitohs player of the year, we all know it, probably Latrell Mitchell, if not probably Cameron Murray. But someone who doesn't get a lot of credit, in my opinion, for the season that they had was Tavita Totola. Without him in that side, he was phenomenal for South Sydney this year. But let's go on to their season. They were getting flogged by the Storm, ended up losing that game 15-14 in Golden Point. Great game there towards the end. Beat their rivals, the Roosters, 28 points to 16, and knocked them out of the finals, mind you. But the Roosters had a lot of injuries in that game, but still, to their credit, South Sydney played some grubby footy, managed to get the win at Allianz Stadium. Just want to see what comments there. Latrell Mitchell's a grub. Hello, Entertain House. Thank you. All right, so they then lost to the Tigers. The Tigers coming off their win against Parramatta, 21-20, did the same thing, but it was Luke Brooks this week kicking the field goal. Then they beat Manly, flogged by Broncos, a 2-point victory over the Warriors where they led 26-6 and only won the game 32 points to 30. So that game made me go, what the hell is going on with this side? Thumped by the by the Raiders. Then they beat the Tigers convincingly in Indigenous round. Titans convincingly. Flogged by the Dragons. They flogged Parramatta in a rainy game. Great game against the Bulldogs. One of the games of the year. 28-36. Latrell Mitchell had a great game. Paul Vaughan scored a try to put the Bulldogs in front. But in the end, it was just too good for the Bunnies, scoring 7 tries to 5 in that one. Then you go to a win to the Melbourne Storm, 24 points to 12. A loss to the Sharks in another great game of the year, 21 points to 20. Latrell had his chances, didn't execute them. Then they kept Parramatta scoreless, 26 points to 0. Almost beat the Panthers in the grand final rematch, which is one of the games of the year, in my opinion, 26-22. It was so good to watch. Beat the Cowboys. So really nice record there. They've kept Parramatta scoreless. They've played a grand final rematch where they've lost by 4 points. They've defeated the Cowboys by 10, who obviously they're sitting in a great position on the ladder. Then they come into this game against the Roosters with a few injuries. The opening of Allianz, lose it. Then they get flogged by the Panthers in week 3 of the finals, bowing out after defeating the Cronulla Sharks and knocking them out. So for them to turn around their season from where they were to what they managed to do and how far they made it, even though it was their 5th straight prelim or whatever, this is going to surprise a lot of you. But I'm going to give the South Sydney Rabbitohs an 8 out of 10. I know it's a high result, but for me, especially with Latrell Mitchell coming back from injury, a lot of players' uncertainty around what happens there. For them to finish in 7th, be expected to be outside the 8 in a few people's mind early on, and then a lot of people to say they're definitely looking like they're going to miss the 8. I'm going to give them an 8. I think they deserve this 8. They finished in 7th. I'm going to give them an 8 out of 10. Should be 2. Nah. I'm proud of the season we had. Excited for 2023, says CJ Moxley. Yeah, you mentioned it. Lachlan Ilias. Lachlan Ilias had a nice season as well. Few iffy decisions for the most part, but replacing Adam Reynolds is such a huge job. So, yeah, I think they had a fantastic season. South Sydney, 8 out of 10. Moving on to the Sydney Roosters, the rivals of the Rabbitohs. They finished in 6th. A lot of people expected this side to make top 4. A lot of people tipped them to win the premiership. Seems to happen every year. They're favourites to win the comp again next year. They get Brandon Smith. This year, Connor Watson returned to the club. As for their season, interesting one. They had a good win in Townsville, 28 points to 4 against the Cowboys. They ended up on a big win streak towards the end. I just want to check the exact number and count them for you. So basically, their win against the Dragons, where they were down 14-12 at halftime. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 straight wins before being knocked out by their rivals, the Rabbitohs. Tedesco went off. Manu went off. I think Tupou might have gone off as well. So a lot of things didn't go the Roosters' way. They had a nice win against Melbourne, 18 points to 14. They managed to score 72 points against the Tigers at Sydney Cricket Ground. A really boring game, that one, but just they scored plenty of tries. They had some great attacking points scored for them, some great memory tries. Joseph Manu had a phenomenal season, in my opinion. Nat Butcher showed that he's one of those rising stars. They had a nice win against Parramatta at Suncorp. They were leading 21-6. They held on 31-24. Yes, it sounds like an NFL score, that one. They beat Manly, who were expected to be a contender, by 14 points in round 2, but we can't take too much out of that. So look, they lost to Knights, which is a shocking start. They lost to Rabbitohs. They lost to Dragons. That's 2 losses that are a bit unexpected. Then they lost to Bulldogs. I think the loss to Parramatta at the time was it was 50-50, so I'm not going to count that as a bad one for them. They played well against Penrith. I don't think they were that bad. I'm going to go with a... But then again, they probably should have finished in 4th or 5th, shouldn't they? I'm going to go with a 6. I'm going to go with a 6. I'm going to go with a 6. I think it's a little bit harsh, but I think with the squad they've got on paper, I'm going to go with a 6. They definitely need to look at some decisions going into 2024 with who they want to keep and who they want to get rid of. Luke Keary didn't do much in 2022, in my opinion. We're all expecting him to. I'm going to go with a 6 for the Sydney Roosters. The game of the year for us was the Para Eels at Magic Round. Yeah, it was a good game. I'm proud of our season and finish the top 8, bring on next season. Absolutely. I don't think as high as South. The 6 sounds right, maybe 7th. Yeah, I think South's had a better season. Even though they finished below them, I think South's had a better season. This team, Melbourne Storm. Really interesting one, this one. Melbourne Storm, expected by a few people to go back to the grand final, do one better, win the premiership. Cameron Munster had a great season. Pappenhausen went down with injury. It's a what-if scenario. They were beaten by a Parramatta. They then flogged the Bulldogs 44 points to 0. Golden Point thriller, that game. And Pappenhausen got the Storm right back into that game. They scored 166 points in 3 weeks, 70-10 against the Warriors, 50-2 against the Knights, and then 42-6 against the Dragons. They were flogged by the Cowboys. The Cowboys' first win against the Storm, I believe, in about 7 straight games, 36 points to 6. Let's have a look at that lineup, though. Really interesting. You had Nick Meaney at fullback. You had Cameron Munster with Harry Grant in the halves for that one. So a few interesting decisions. And I remember Tui Kamakamika, I think, was in the back row rather than being a prop. So strange old decisions there from the coach. Close game against the Broncos. They won that game 32 points to 20, but I thought the Broncos were really competitive. It was tied 16-all at halftime for that one, but a nice victory. They had a loss to the Manly Sea Eagles, 36 points to 30 at Lottoland. Flogged by the Sharks all night. Nothing went their way, 28 points to 6. lost to the Raiders. So they went on a, 4-game losing streak? Yeah, 4-game losing streak. Lost to Rabbit before they finally got their mojo back against the Warriors, then the Titans. Then they beat the Panthers 16-0 at Penrith, which is their best win of the season. Their best win of the season, undoubtedly, in my opinion. Lost to Roosters and bowed out in week 1 of the finals. What a disappointing season for the Melbourne Storm. Beaten by Parramatta, beaten by Roosters, beaten by Rabbitohs, beaten by Cowboys, beaten by Sharks. I am going to give this side a 6 out of 10. Just like the Roosters, I think they probably had a lot of injuries, to be fair, and probably did well like the Roosters last year to finish where they did. But I am very disappointed in the Melbourne Storm, and I think a lot of people will be. They've been a dominant side for years. But, yeah, for me, the Melbourne Storm, I am going to give you a 6. I think it's lucky to give you a 6. Could have gone lower. Could have gone with about a 4.5. But I'm not going to go with the 4.5. I'm going to go with 6. And, yeah, Cameron Munster, probably their best player. Harry Grant had no second-year syndrome and had a phenomenal season with the Storm as well. 4th, my team, the Parramatta Eels. What a season. Went to the grand final. First grand final since 2009 against the Penrith Panthers. Lost to the West Tigers. Lost to the Bulldogs. Lost to the Rabbitohs twice. Kept to 0 and made a grand final. Oh, God, where do I start? Great games at CommBank. Put together some classy performances. Best win for me, I think that game against the Roosters, 26 points to 16 against the Roosters at CommBank, especially Paulo backing up from Origin, still playing really well as well. Nice win in Canberra to get the job done again, 28 points to 20. Golden Point Thriller. Beat Penrith at Penrith. First time Penrith have lost at Penrith, mind you, since 2019. So look, lost to Bulldogs, lost to Tigers, really disappointing final. So for me, there was inconsistency, but a few people had this team outside the 8. Going into the final few rounds, said we wouldn't make the 8. Finished in 4th position. I had us in top 4. I had us bowing out in the prelim. Probably could have bowed out in the prelim for a few calls going our way. But then again, we were down by 8 points and got ourselves back into the game at Townsville. Played some of our best footy throughout the final series up until the grand final. I am going to give Parramatta, I think I'm going to go with the same as the Rabbitohs here. I think I'm going to go with an 8. And I know you probably should put them higher because they were in the grand final. But as I said, some of those losses against the Bulldogs and the Tigers, they bounced back from them, but they just shouldn't have happened. And we could have finished a little bit higher on the ladder if not for some of those stupid losses. But you always lose games. It's part of footy. But I'm going to give Parramatta an 8 out of 10 for their season, finishing in 4th position. Great season. And hopefully we return to a grand final soon. 3rd, the North Queensland Cowboys. Well, holy shit. Didn't we all have this team finishing as wooden spooners, or if not, around 14th, 15th, 16th? If you have them outside of 14th, 15th, 16th, you're an absolute genius because this team was not expected to do anything, but they made it through to the prelim, a home prelim, after beating the second-place Cronulla Sharks, a team that had the wood over them, mind you, as well, going into that game. But Valentine home seals the deal and gets them into a prelim. The Cowboys exceeded expectations. They didn't make a grand final, but they had great players. Cotter had a great season. Taumalolo, Reece Robson was an absolute weapon this year. I hope he continues his form. And look, I could see him potentially in the next few years getting a spot in a Blues jersey. Maybe not a starting number 9, but definitely on the bench, coming off for someone as well, like an Appy. I don't know if Appy Coruscant will be there. We'll see who is the Blues squad next year. It's hard to predict and pinpoint. But, guys, they exceeded expectations. They didn't win too much away from Sydney. Other than that, you can't fault them. I'm going to give the Cowboys a 9 out of 10. Incredibly high. But even though I think they showed that they obviously did go far in finals, I thought they weren't going to go that far. I didn't think they were going out in straight sets. I didn't think that. I know a lot of people did, but I didn't think that from this side. But I'm going to give them a 9. I think they had a great season and shocked a lot of people as well, the Cowboys. Rugby League History says the Rugby League end of season awards are coming soon. Head over to Rugby League History to vote. Make sure you vote, guys. I have been nominated for the Vlogger of the Year. I think there's also an Intro of the Year and a tipping video, which tipped the Tigers to beat the Broncos, tipped the Raiders to beat the Rabbits, tipped the Dragons to beat Manly, picked the Parramatta Eels to beat Panthers. So a few big upsets this year that I've predicted. But anyway, I'm going to give the Cowboys a 9 out of 10 for North Queensland. Moving into second position, the Cronulla Sharks. Now, the Cronulla Sharks for mine, I think I had them in 6th position. I had them absolutely in the 8. On paper, they had a great squad. First year coach, though, to get them to second position. What an absolutely fantastic result for the Cronulla Sharks. Nico Hines had a phenomenal season, and that was shown with him winning the Dally M. Who else was fantastic? Talakai spent a few games on the sideline, but showed that moving him from the second row to the center works, and it was a coach mastermind decision. Great wins for the Sharks. They grinded out some games. They had a close loss against the Panthers, but they played some great footy overall for the most part this season. So for mine, the Cronulla Sharks to finish in second. That's another great season. I'm going to have to go with an 8 here. I'm going to go with an 8 purely because I think they're on that level of Rabbitohs and Parramatta. But I think the issue is that they went out in straight sets. That's the issue for me. They did lose Talakai going into finals week 2, but they definitely could have done better against that game against the Rabbits. They just didn't turn up. So, yeah, I think that the Cronulla Sharks are getting an 8 out of 10 for mine. I think that they had a great win against Parramatta. I think they had a shock loss against the Broncos. And I mentioned Nico Hines, probably that player of the season. Well, now we get into our final spot, which is our minor premiers. We'll move out of the way a bit, and it is this guy here, Isaiah Yeo, co-captain Nathan Cleary, who spent some time on the sideline, the Penrith Panthers. The Penrith Panthers, your premiers for 2022, going back to back and looking more dominant this year, in my opinion, than last year. It's a weird thing to say because I think they lost a couple players. Now they lose more players, but they did this without Matt Burton, who was a phenomenal centre last year. Api Coruscant off to the Tigers, Kickout off to the Canterbury Bulldogs, and he didn't get much first grade, but worth mentioning that Jermaine Hopgood is off to Parramatta, who was in the side via the bench a couple times this year. What can I say? Was it a 10 out of 10 season? Probably not. They were beaten by Parramatta. They were beaten by Melbourne. Nathan Cleary, with a costly decision, spent some time on the sideline, but still proved that he's a fantastic halfback and got the job done for them, got the chockies. Brian To'o had a fantastic final series. Viliami Kickout wasn't the back rower of the year, in my opinion, but throughout the final series, he had some fantastic games of footy. So for the Penrith Panthers, I think I'm going to give them a 9. Just like the North Queensland Cowboys, phenomenal season. We expected another great season from them. Few little hiccups there, so no one's getting a 10 out of 10. But they had, they did beat the Eels in the finals. They sure did, Dolphins fan. I can see your comment there. But overall, got the job done and picked up another premiership. Ivan Cleary, fantastic coach. Are they the new Melbourne Storm? They've now made 3 grand finals in a row. Can they do it again next year? Can they do a three-peat? Be the first team to do it in a long time. But there you go, guys. That's my ratings for all teams. So from 16 through to 1, don't need to do a separate video this year. I can start working on some Rugby League World Cup content. Video coming out tomorrow, which is my birthday tomorrow. And that video, my birthday video, will be the predicted, or if I was the NRL CEO, what I would do for round one. So all the games I would have as round one. If you would like to see it, drop a comment as well. After this video goes after it goes up, drop a comment. Would you like to see me and Freeney jump back on the channel? Would you like to see me and Freeney do a little video on Magic Round next year and predicting our lineup for Magic Round, depending on how tomorrow's video goes? I've also got some Elite videos coming out, my Elite collection. I mentioned that World Cup content that will be coming out as well. And I'm going to react to what I thought of the 2022 season going into it, my ladder predictions. But there we go, guys. That is it for this video. TJ Sports says, have a good birthday, mate. Thank you so much. I am turning 23. I'm an old bastard. And then York Knox, who has been in all video and has the Infinity Gauntlet. How cool is that? Says, happy birthday, mate. Well, in 4 hours, I will consider that as a birthday. But, guys, thank you so much for hanging out on this stream. We've been going for about 46 minutes, so a little bit longer than planned, but I really do appreciate it. I love this channel. Make sure you like this video after it goes up. Subscribe to the channel. This has been the 2022 season reviews. I will see you guys tomorrow. Thank you for watching.